Okay, so it should be recording, and let me share my screen. Is this the right screen? No, hold on, that screen. All right. Can everybody see this so far? You can put it in the chat if you can.
Yes.
Okay, good. So yes, Poultry Nutrition. And this is one of the things that we work on heavily here at Tennessee State University. We have done, and we continue to do feed trials with the birds. Mostly with broilers, but we've also had a couple of guinea fowl studies that we've done too. Especially looking at the amount of amino acids that are added to the diet, specifically lysine, methionine, and we've done a few things with arginine too. But those are the two main amino acids that are usually added to poultry feed, or they make sure that those are available to the birds because they help with muscle development and growth. As well as lysine is really good for is really good for the immune system. So I'll go ahead and get started with just a couple of little questions. And I did try to send this little part out in the chat after this slide. We'll be able to go through just five quick questions just to kind of get an idea of, your information or what you might need to know or what you know about poultry and their needs as far as nutrition is concerned. So that is really a big part of the poultry industry or just raising birds in general is they have to be fed. So you make sure that you have proper nutrition, and that's really a big thing that will cause your poultry or as you're raising your birds for them to be successful, for them to grow. This can affect their growth rates, the production of their eggs, and also can cause them to be disease resistant. So really quickly, and then y'all can either put it in the chat or you can put out yes or no, because I don't know about some of these links or, trying to scan it on your phone. We haven't been too successful. Like maybe one or two people have been able to access it, but you can just put in your answers in the chat for this one. Because like I say, this is being recorded, so I'll be able to get your answers on these. So do chickens need carbohydrate? This is a true or false question. Is it true or is it false that they need um true? Yes, it is true. They do need carbohydrates. Next question. Proteins are not needed for chickens to grow. Is this true or false? Proteins are not needed for chickens to grow. True or false? That is false. Yes. That protein, that's a huge thing. And then we'll kind of talk about like what ingredients kind of provide the proteins for the birds as well as carbohydrates and other things like that. Very good. You guys are smart. Y'all know what y'all are doing. Now, chickens need water. True or false? That should be an easy one. Yes, yes, true and lots. That's very right. That's right. Okay. And layers and broilers. Here it says layers and broilers have the same diet. Is this true or false? False. Yeah, that's false. They do not. And we'll get into that a little bit farther, but there's just some different variations of certain minerals and things that you would add to the diets based on the type of bird or what you're planning on do with that bird. So the last question is chickens should have unlimited access to their food and water. Is that true or false? Let's see what you said. Yes, it's true. It's very true. So you all did great. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. and we'll get in, we'll talk about what one of the most important ingredients. Water. This is really the first essential thing when it comes to nutrition. For several reasons. Because, um, of course, we all need water. We all are water. Majority of the living things on this universe or in this earth are need water, right? So, and again, water is the foundation of life. There's so many percentages of water that's needed, like with even within our bodies, as well as animals, as well as the birds. So again, and it's the birds consume twice as much water as they do feed. And it is our job as we're raising the birds to make sure that they're healthy and they perform properly and they're going to get the best, you'll get the best eggs or you get the best meat from it, is to make sure that water is clean. But the purpose of the water, yes, it is to keep the bird hydrated, but also the water kind of helps transport the nutrients and it also helps to regulate the bird's body temperature, especially during hot times. So now we're in March, right? So y'all notice the weather's kind of changing. And as we progress on through the next couple of months, probably all the way till maybe October, November, just depending, because we have those wonky days, but that can cause heat stress on the birds. And that will cause them not to be able to perform well. They won't put out as much eggs, or their body weight will change under stress. So, not providing water for your birds, especially not clean water for your birds, can also have an effect on how you're raising them and actually how they'll end the products that you're going to get from the birds. Also, a lot of people didn't know, especially when it comes to broilers and the meat that they produce, 72% of that of the products or the meat is water, actually. So you are actually getting hydrated when you're eating chicken meat, not just the protein side of everything or the iron or anything that those that is provided to. A lot of the meat is made up of water. And again, when you have continuous access to fresh water and making sure that the water is always there for them to take part in, and making sure that we can prevent bacterial growth. Because, it's just like, when you take a bottle of water, right? And it's purified. The water's been purified and everything. But as soon as you kind of crack that bottle open, it's open to the air. Anything that's in the air can get in and get out. And as you're drinking and drinking, it's best to kind of like try your best to finish the bottles and don't have your bottles of water sitting around. Because if you've ever picked up a bottle of water and you start looking at it, you can start seeing things floating in it. And of course, over time, you'll start seeing things growing in the water. So again, water is the most important nutrient for the birds. So when you're starting to go raise your birds, you just make sure that you're going to have, or make sure that the birds are going to be able to have access to continuous clean water. And you will, if I mean, I know what you're looking at right now is more of like a commercial nipple that that some birds could. Now, some of these things you might or may not be able to find, but usually we have different types of waterers, and we'll look at the pictures of some of the different waterers coming up soon. However, you just need to make sure that they're going to be having access. And they also, depending on the area of Tennessee where you live, some people use well water for their property. So sometimes that ends up being the water that they end up using for the birds. Or sometimes they might buy filtered water for the birds. Or if it's city water, then we know that for those that water is chlorinated and also fluoride. So you don't have to worry about, the bacterial coming in. But at the same time, you still would need to change the water regularly. Really, you need to change it daily. So, the quality of your water and the intake of your birds is really important. And how will you know if your birds are, um, getting a good amount of water? One, they look healthy. They're not looking a little bit drab or depressed, or you don't see them holding their mouths open and panting. So that means that they have enough water. And you can tell in their feathers and their feathering as their feathers change, they'll be nice and glossy. But if, there's factors that your water, if it's damaged or if it's contaminated or there's things growing in it, this can also inhibit your bird's ability to keep on having to burn energy, as well as keeping their body temperature right, and then they're not going to be able to absorb a lot of the amino acids or the nutrients that's in the feed that you're giving them. And so eventually that'll lead to your decreased egg production, and then it can also cause the birds to get sick. You don't want to have your birds deprived of water no more than 12 hours, and definitely not 36 hours, because by then they're probably going to be going on to the other side of things. It'll be hard to kind of like maintain them, especially when you're dealing with little bitty chicks. It's very important. You're going to have to really monitor and watch them a whole lot to make sure that the water is clean and the water is safe. I mean, it's just like having newborn babies. Same thing with them. You want to make sure, just like you clean the water, you clean the bottles, you're going to clean your everything that anything that's going to be around in their area. And you make sure that they always have access to drinking water. Okay? Now, this is just an example, because we also have done some things where we had another poultry expert here on campus to go out and test people's drinking waters and to make sure that it's okay. So, like I said, once again, we're looking at a commercial line, and this is just an example of them coming to make sure that the water coming out of there is clean. I mean, even though, yes, the line usually runs continuously, but as a period of time, the lines will sit there, as flocks are being moved out, and then you're cleaning up the area to make sure you're going to get ready to bring another set of flocks in. So those lines can sit, they can be dry, or they can bring in, and I mean, you see. There's all kind of things, dust or anything that could be sitting on the lines themselves. So we did provide a service where we would come out and look at people's their poultry setup and test their water for them, and just to make sure that the water stayed clean and things like that. But then again, if you look at the birds' waterers and you're like, oh, that's nasty, or oh, I'm not going to drink that, then what makes you think that they're going to want to drink it too? So you have to make sure that their water is clean also. So the water should be, pretty much clear visibly. It should be colorless. You shouldn't see any, thing floating in there, and tasteless and odorless. And we'll talk about some of the things of some of the different minerals that might be in water or could be high in water, which is not necessarily good for the birds. Again, can't stress enough. So I'm gonna keep saying this over and over for a while, especially when it comes to the water. Make sure that it's clean and make sure the water is safe. So right now, what you're looking at is really a big example of a majority of the farmers that we've encountered. Actually, when the birds are small, we would actually use a waterer just like this in the picture. And we do, of course, we're in the city, so we do use city water. However, we have to make sure that we do clean the waters themselves prior to adding water to it, as well as every time we change the water, we clean the waters out, because sometimes different things can collect in there. Like I said, with the bacteria, you've got viruses, there's protozoa, there's yeast, and then, when you're dealing with plastic, there's always a possibility of mold building up. So we have to make sure you just kind of like monitor and make sure. And if you can see, there's a brick under this particular waterer, and that's so that the water's not sitting on, I guess, either the hay or straw or whatever they're using. Because what will happen in that water is very close to the bird's feet as well as their bottoms. So poo and all kind of stuff can be kicked up, and dust and all kind of dusty stuff can get into that water. So, as the birds start to get bigger, these are ways where you can kind of raise the water up off of the ground so that it's not collecting feces and things like that in the water. Let's see. And then pH, that's a important thing to know. Usually around 6 to 8. That's usually a what do we call a neutral pH? Because on a pH scale, 2 is acidic, very, very acidic, and 14 is very, very basic. But in between about 6 to 8 pH, 6, 7, and 8 pH, that's pretty much what you call a neutral or maybe more like an alkaline type. And of course, there are pH strips that you can get probably at the co-op or anything like that. If you ever want to kind of just make sure that your water is, in that range. So this is basically the same type of pH of what physiologically all of anything that's inside of the birds, like the blood is about the same pH. The only thing that probably would be more acidic is probably the stomach, but everywhere else, physiologically, the pH is going to be neutral. So that means you want the water coming into the bird's body to be the neutral too. And it's the same for humans. So, our gastrointestinal tract and their gastrointestinal tract is very, very similar to each other. The only difference between theirs and ours is we have teeth. They don't. I don't know if you've ever looked in a bird's mouth before, but they have a tongue and they have beaks, but they do not have teeth. So, and for us, teeth kind of help us to grind and break down more food particles as it goes down our throats. Now, that's the reason why, chickens actually have a crop and they have a gizzard. So that's their mechanism of trying to break down the food a little bit more. But even during that process in their saliva and things like that, all the pHs in those are going to be between 6 and 7. So that's going to be in the neutral range. So we want the water to be the same. So certain mineral contaminants, and these are two minerals that kind of can collect in the water quite a bit, and also just depending on where your water is coming from. And then you can kind of actually see the buildup, especially when it comes to iron, because your water will have like a brownish tint. I mean, you can look at the picture itself. That's pretty big, but there's still some where, it might not be as prevalent is not prevalent as what you see here. So iron and magnesium are two minerals that can kind of build up in the water. And what will happen is it'll cause the water to be bitter to the birds. So that means that the birds are not going to be drinking as much. And if they're not drinking as much, that means they're not eating as much because they also use the water to help push down the food that they've just ingested. So, and then and also both of these minerals can keep bacterial growth. It kind of can keep the promotion of the growth. So if you have a large amount of these minerals in there, and if the water is sitting out, it's not being constantly changed, then as the iron builds up, as well as magnesium builds, especially the iron, then the bacteria is going to be more attracted to that. And then that's going to cause it to grow and increase. Um, so sometimes, depending on where you are, some people will have a filtration system that's on either on their property or where they're getting the water from. And then, like I said, with the city water, it's chlorinated. And there are some products that are out there that can be added to the water that's not harmful to the birds. So then again, we're going to put out the safety training, but you all already know about this. And we've talked about this before about how we could come out on the property, we take samples, and we'll, just test to see if there's bacteria there and if those bacteria are antibiotic resistance. And then, we can provide you with a UV light for your water stations just to make sure to keep those bacteria from overgrowing. And then again, as for assisting us with this important research, you will receive a gift card for your groceries. And of course, the installation for the UV light will be free. And then we can bring you back and we can work with you on prevention of these antibiotic resistance, even if it's like making sure the birds stay healthy, how the birds feed. And if you're getting to the point where you're thinking about maybe even processing your own birds, we can talk about the food safety on that end too. So now water is done and then it's out the way. Now we're going to get into the ingredients that are actually in the feed. And what are these particular things? You have carbohydrates. Why do we why do we have carbs or carbohydrates? That is the main power. That's the power source, is the energy. So we have the carbohydrates for energy, right? And that can make up a good majority of the bird's feed is carbohydrates. So, like you say, 60 to 70% of a bird's diet is carbohydrates. And that usually comes from corn, wheat, or it can be coming from sorghum. And this is the form of carbohydrates that the bird can actually digest. So they don't have the particular enzymes like we actually do to kind of break some of those things down. So we'll have to kind of assist how we end up putting some of those formulas together and how we end up putting our feed together. Okay. So let's see. And then, of course, while we're putting these in, while we're making sure that they're getting carbohydrates by either having a corn-based diet or you having corn, you might have some wheat in there together. And then, of course, there's sorghum. Sorghum has been, a couple of our plant scientists actually study sorghum to see about providing them either for cows or even for chickens, just as an alternative for corn and wheat. Because there might be certain areas where corn and wheat may not be easy for them to grow, so they will grow sorghum instead. So they can use that as, but however, it's still a good carbohydrate to provide to the animals. And so when you have a good quality carbohydrate, this can help with your feed conversion ratios. And if you're not familiar with feed conversion ratio, this is just a ratio that we're interested in is, okay, so how, if these birds are eating so many pounds a week, how much of this feed are they going to be able to efficiently turn into meat? Or are they going to be efficiently able to turn that into and have enough calcium to produce a certain amount of eggs? So that's something that we monitor quite a bit. That will tell us that our birds are doing what they're supposed to do. So we're feeding them properly. They're getting enough energy. They're getting enough carbohydrates, and that means that they're going to produce good eggs or they're going to produce good meat. To make meaning their growth. How is their growth going to be? So that's just the feed conversion ratio. And then there's fats. Fat is all involved. It kind of goes back to how when we were all growing up, what is a balanced diet? So we need to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of that. Too much of one thing is not a good thing. So we covered the carbohydrates. So fat is another thing that's in there, especially when it comes to if you're raising little birds. They are going to need that, just like little babies. The fat is really important. So you want to have that's another form of energy, but that is a more concentrated type energy. So fat provides about 2.25 times more energy than carbohydrates. However, carbohydrates still about 60 to 7% of the diet. The fats aren't that much. You're not going to add a whole lot of fats, or even if you look at the ingredients on your bags of feed, how they're put together, it'll give you the amount of fat that's in there. But it is an essential thing because it is a high energy. There during the growth period for the little bitty birds, there's high energy demand. So then we do add more. And then as the birds get a little bit bigger or a little bit older, the amount of fat that you're providing for them might drop off some. So these fats can also carry certain soluble types of vitamins, and this will actually improve the bird's feed or the palatability, and kind of gives it a little bit of a taste for the birds. I've never eaten bird feed, so I can't really say. However, it has been said that this kind of like helps with their ability to, ingest and make things move well through their bodies. So, and one really, really, really important fatty acid is linoleic acid. And it's really important for the immune system. But it's also very critical for your egg production, as well as chick development. So a majority of the oils that are provided in the bird's feed will have the linoleic acid in there. And it might even be, if they don't say, well, this is the amount of fat that's in the feed, it might also have the contents or the amount of linoleic acid that's in the feed. It just depends on the ingredients that's on the bag. So then proteins. This is another building block. So we've got carbohydrates, we've got fats, and now we have proteins. Proteins, these are the four major things that proteins provide for the birds, especially when it comes to the broilers, their muscle development. So majority of the meat that we're consuming and we're producing is muscle, right? So the breast is muscle, the thighs is muscle, the legs are muscle, and the wings, they got a little bit of muscle too, right? So providing enough protein for them is going to allow your broilers to be big. And then for your egg layers, your egg production, you need protein for eggs. So, they talk about how egg is a good source of protein for people, right? When we're ingesting the eggs. So we need to give the birds a good amount of protein so that those birds can provide the right amount of protein in their eggs for us. Okay, so it's a really added benefit. This helps with their feather growth. So it's important for all the birds, not just the broilers, not just the layers. If you have good protein balance in their diet, then that means their feathers are going to be growing in well. And if you're not, you'll be able to tell because their feathers won't be growing in that well at all. They'll have spots and patches and things like that. And then, of course, amino acid balance, which is what I had talked about before, some of the things that we've studied here at Tennessee State University. Um, those are your building blocks to provide protein in the nutritional. So amino acids are very important. Methionine is very important when it comes to muscle development. Lysine does the same, but it will actually go more so towards the immune system. So, of course, at the bottom of the slide, you see protein quality depends on amino acid profile. So it's not just the quantity, it's not how much. You always need to make sure that you will see lysine and methionine and lysine on your feedbacks. Okay. And like I said, we have done studies with those to see the different levels and amounts. And depending on the amount and the level, will provide a certain type of growth pattern for these birds. And then there's your minerals, calcium and phosphorus. Those are very, very, very important for your layers. So that's where, your shell for your eggs come from, the calcium. So the actually what ends up happening is the bird has calcium within their body and that is used or broken down so it can provide the shell for the eggs. So as that's happening for the bird's body, we're going to need to continue to replenish the calcium and the phosphorus for that bird, okay? So in the bone development, so as the birds are growing, we want to keep their bones strong, their development to make sure that they can stand up straight. So those would be some things you can look for in the event there's some deficiencies for the birds, if they can't walk or if their legs are breaking and things like that. Calcium and phosphorus are very important when it comes to that. And once again, like I said before, the eggshell formation. So you need to make sure that you have the right amounts of calcium in there. And layer hens, they will need about 4% of calcium in their diet. So that's where it comes from when I said do broilers and layers have the same diet. The layer diet will provide more calcium than the broiler diet, and that is specifically for the egg formation of the shell, okay? The eggshell formation. So that's why you would have more calcium in a layer diet than you would the broiler diet. And we've actually accidentally tested this because we had a group of birds that were in a layer study, and then we had like four broilers that were on that we have in the farm too. We actually still have those broilers now. And they were like, well, we're done with the project. We don't need this feed anymore. What should we do? It's like, no, we'll keep the feed. No need to throw anything out. We didn't want to be wasteful. So we just started feeding the broilers the layer diet. And of course, these female hens we've had them almost for 2 years now. So once they started increasing the calcium in their diet, they actually started to lay eggs themselves. So that was pretty interesting. So I can attest, I've seen it with my own two eyes, that the increase in calcium will allow your birds to make sure that they lay eggs. And not just for layers, it's also for broilers. However, we want to keep our birds for meat, then we don't we do give a certain amount of calcium, but it's not as much as the layers would take. And then of course there's sodium and there's chloride. Salt, NaCl, sodium chloride. So yeah, there is a certain amount of salt that is added within the diet. And this helps with their nerve function as well as the acid base in the body. So that is necessary. And then again, like I said, you can check the ingredients on your feed bags and they should have the amount of these particular things. And then, of course, you have your smaller trace minerals like zinc, copper, and magnesium. And sometimes they can be provided in the bird's feed as like a premix or a vitamin premix, if you've ever heard those terms before. And these will help with their immunity of the bird. So as long as you have those materials in there, that could help the birds to stay healthy as they're growing and changing to be either to provide meat for you or to provide eggs for you. And like I said, those particular minerals are added in premix. And if you haven't looked at our diets, or even if you look at the like a multivitamin that humans take, they kind of have the same kind of breakdown and same type of makeup. So like I said before, their digestive system is very similar to ours. They will need sodium chloride, they'll need calcium, they'll need phosphorus, and they'll need some of those trace elements of zinc, copper, and magnesium or manganese. And then again, vitamin premix again. So within those vitamin premix, there are going to be certain vitamins that they're going to need, especially with the young birds. They definitely will need those, and some will help with their body fat. As they're growing body fat and as their feathers are starting to change, and they'll be able to keep their body temperature. So your fat soluble vitamins would be A, D, E, and K. So like I said, those are stored for body fat. Then you have your vitamin D3, which is crucial for your calcium metabolism. And then water soluble ones, which is your B complex vitamins, and of course your C. And then they're kind of, once you kind of give those birds these vitamin B complexes or the C, they'll stay within they will be continuously supplemented in their diet because those don't stay in the body long. As soon as the bird does its business by either using the bathroom, though, like especially vitamin C is going to leave. So that can be given on a daily basis. But like I say, usually there's a certain amount of each one of these supplements that they'll be putting in there. And again, majority of the time, they've got the right amounts for whatever diet you're trying to provide for these supplements in the form of a vitamin premix. And a lot of times, especially if you have the crumble, the vitamin premix, all these other things have already been added into there. And they will have a list of those ingredients and how much they are that's available for the birds. So you can see these are some images of some of what they end up looking like. If you want to do mesh, if you want to do pellets, if you want to do crumbles. Crumbles is kind of like a mix in between the two. And mesh is, we actually make a mesh for ourselves here on campus. We've got like a super grinder. So we'll take some ground corn, ground soybean, and all these other ingredients, and mix them in a big old mixer. And we kind of make that. But the thing about that is, it's messy. So like you said, you need to have like the right type of feeder to kind of catch some of the mesh because the birds can get a little happy and they can play around in it or whatever, and it just kind of goes everywhere. And then the pellets, that's your compressed feed. So this was put together so it can, you won't have as much feed or you won't have as much wasting either. But it can also help to, if you want to improve your feed ratio or conversion ratio, then you go ahead and you get your pellets. However, the mesh is a little bit more cost effective than your pellets. And then, of course, like I say, the crumble is a mix between those two. And it's really popular for your starter broiler diets because the birds are so small. It's easier for them. A lot of times it's easier for them to do mesh, and pellets are a little bit harder for them. because they're small. And again, birds don't have teeth. So, if they're bags of crumbles, they usually will like to prefer to give those to your broilers, especially during the starter period of time. Then as they get bigger, then they might do pellets. But here on campus, we use mesh all the way through. Because like I said, we actually mix our own feed. And then these are just the different strategies of how you would go about feeding your birds. Or if you go into a co-op or you go somewhere or Tractor Supply to get bags of feed, or even if you go to the co-op, it'll have starter, it'll have grower, and it'll have layer. And it'll tell you how long you're going to be feeding those birds for. So if you're doing the starter diet, and that could be either for layers or it could be for broilers, it'll show you your protein amount is about 20 to 22%. And that allows the birds to grow pretty rapidly within the first 2 months or 8 weeks, right? And then after the 8 weeks, then you're going to go over to the grower diet. So this is having them to grow. And but if you notice, the amount of protein actually starts to go down. So they don't need as much protein at that period of time after 8 weeks. So between 8 and 18 weeks, the protein will be about 16 to 18%. But this will still help with their development. But you don't need as much protein by that period of time. And then the layers, because like I say, with layers, it's going to take a little bit longer for them. So anywhere between 18 plus weeks. However, this diet is going to be rich in calcium. So even with the birds that if they're laying eggs, you can do them with a starter diet, and you can do a grower diet. But then once you get to the 18 weeks period, then you'll be able to do a layer diet, which has high amount of calcium, or 4% of that calcium. And that calcium is there again for your egg production to make sure you have the eggshell and things of that nature. So if you see starter on the bag, then you know that means 0 to 8 weeks. If it's grower, then it's 8 to 13 weeks. And then you have layers. You have the layer diet. And then last but not least, these are just ways of having your trying to have or make sure you have your best practice of feed. So this is just an example of bags of feed or what bags of feed might look like. Now this kind of looks like some things I've seen ourselves. However, we have individual feedback. So we'll have a bag strictly just for ground corn, then we'll have another bag strictly just for ground soybean. Then we have bags for the different amino acids, or we might have bags for so kind of everything comes in bags, but we also make sure we separate them based on what is it we need. And then we do specific calculations for like how much we would want to make. So we have about anywhere between 200 to about 300 birds right now for each study. So we would usually use these big bags because we make about 100 pounds of feeds to start with. But as you are doing this, you want to make sure that you get your feed or you purchase your feed, and you want to make sure as you're feeding the birds, you want to write down like how much are you kind of giving them. So if you end up with like a 50-pound bag of feed and say by week 2, that bag's empty. So that's giving you an idea kind of how much these birds are starting to eat. Make sure, especially now that's March, field mice are running around. Little ants and things are running around. Boll weevils, everything. Now it's spring. Everything is springing alive. So you want to try to keep your feed bags in a cool, dry place. Don't let it get wet because sometimes that can kind of produce mold. And excuse me, and it also may depend on the type of bag. Like I know for us, a lot of our bags come in as paper bags, big paper bags that are sealed at each end. So we kind of keep them, and we keep them off the floor. That in the event some little field mice might kind of run in the house or something, so that they don't rip the bags open, and you don't want them to get in there because then that can also produce, that can cause diseases and things like that. If the mice are allowed to run around, they might poop in your feed and things like that, and you don't want that. Same thing with the boll weevils. You want them running because they can come in and they can eat all your feed up. And then they can also produce waste in there. So that kind of helps you with trying to be a little bit biosecurity to make sure that there's no pests or wild animals or even wild birds, because that's the thing that's driving a lot of our avian flu right now. It's the ducks, it's the vultures, it's the geese, and they can fly virtually anywhere. And you don't want them coming around and mingling within your birds, or their waste could get in the water, or can get in the feed, or can get in the ground. The birds can peck at it. So, just kind of be um very precautious about where you store your feed, how you keep it, and things like that. And then, like I said, depending on the weather where we are, you might have to adjust it by a certain period of time. So during the winter, you usually increase your energy. So that means you would make sure you'd have more of your carbohydrates and things like that. And then when it starts to get warmer, as you're moving into the summertime, then you can adjust your feed from there. May not need as much as the carbohydrates during that period of time, but you will definitely make sure that you keep water on a regular basis. And if you have your birds outside, if you do have an area where it's shaded, or you might have a bush, or you might have a tree that has leaves on it, it would be a good idea to have your water there. Because the sun can beam down on your water and it will make the water hot. And then also the change in temperature can also change the pH. And then the birds themselves, they're not going to want to eat. They're not going to want to drink that water. So that's during the summers and springtime, that's when you want to try to change your feed out, or just monitor it as far as temperature wise. Because the birds usually like to have cool water. Okay. Well, that's all I have. There's my contact info again. Are there any questions so far? And I'll
Oh,
stop sharing my screen.
hi. I know I haven't been able to get on the calls lately, but this was good, and I'm glad I got on the tail end. The
Yes.
sorghum you mentioned earlier,
Uh-huh. Yes.
where is that the like the syrup? Are we talking about the sorghums?
Yeah, it's the plant that makes the syrup.
Oh,
Yes, it's the same thing.
so where would I find that?
May have them, and Tractor Supply may have them as
Tractor.
well.
Okay.
Yeah. I was gonna say Tractor Supply or Co-op, they
So
may
it's
have them
so it's
too.
actually the plant. And
Yes.
you put
And
it
what
in
they
with the corn and the wheat?
Yes, and what they'll do is they'll grind up the sorghum itself, just like you would grind up the corn or you would grind up the wheat. And
Okay.
they'll end up putting it in a bag. And just let me know if you're looking for that. If you can't find it, then you can just shoot me an email. Because like I said, we have another professor that is doing research with it. And a lot of times sorghum was put in that group of carbohydrates because now we're starting to have a lot of different natural disasters, and
Yes.
it's a pretty resilient plant. And this, depending on different locations where people end up living, then corn may not be they might not be able to grow corn, or might not be able to sustain well. So sorghum was a good substitute for that. And it does still provide a decent amount of carbohydrates for the
Okay.
birds. But
Okay.
yeah, it's the same plant. It's the
Okay.
same plant.
And because I'm late too,
Mhm.
I saw where you said if we want to become part of this, are you doing a study with this group?
Yes. So
Okay, so
we
I missed all of that. I'm sorry.
no, that's fine. Yeah, so we also have some funding we're going to take we'll be able to come out to you all and take some samples, and we can test, and it will be water maybe around the farm, and maybe in areas where there might be feces from the birds or your animals. We could take those and we'll take them back to our lab and we'll test them, and then we'll let you know, like, well, is there E. coli around, is there salmonella around, and if any of them are antibiotic resistant, and then we could set up to do a free UV light installation. Mostly it's going to be where your water source is, or where
Okay.
you have the water. And that way it'll keep the UV light will make sure that any bacteria or viruses or protozoan or mold doesn't grow in the water source. And then, like I said, we also provide $100 gift card for you helping us. And then we can set up workshops where we can teach you about food safety and things like that. You know, just handling from going from having your whole farm, handling the birds or handling the products that the birds provide, how the best to do that, if even if it's eggs or whatever, or even the meat. Because some people actually do their own processing too. So we give information about that.
Okay. All right.
And
Thank
if you
you.
don't mind, could you put your email address in the chat? Because I think something I tried to send,
You
some
did.
things have bounced back to me. So I just want to make sure I have the right
Okay.
email addresses. Now,
All
John,
right.
I know I've been sending you things I made sure I spelled everything
Yeah.
right.
So,
Okay.
um, the other thing, so if we live out of state, you will come to wherever
We'll
you.
have to work on that. I mean, we do have a travel budget.
Okay.
And we did have some pauses to some of our funding, but thank God we didn't lose them.
Oh,
So
good.
we're still able to kind of do what it is we need to do for this project. And then, just to kind of help people who are interested in doing poultry themselves. Because
Okay.
like I said, we've been doing it for since 1953, and we're in the process of getting a new facility.
Okay.
But yeah, so we'll work and see what we can do with people that live outside the state.
So if I decide to start,
Hmm.
can I get back in touch with you? Because I think everybody should be thinking to start.
Yeah,
Well,
it does. I mean, right now it is. And like I said, this is something that kind of started really once the pandemic hit because
yeah.
it was hard to shop, it was hard to get things. And, we've kind of come away from us doing, providing our own food for ourselves. Even though, yes, we do, but we've, relied so much on farmers and they're having a hard time too right now with some of the funding that they were supposed to get from the federal government. They're not, but they're working to try to get it back to them so that they can get us up and running. But it still doesn't hurt to have your own stuff
Oh, okay.
on your house. And then for us at Tennessee State, we might do things a little bit different from UT where, some people are like, well, I don't have a whole lot of land. Well, that's okay. We can show you what you can do with your land, even if it's quarter of an acre, half an acre, or whatever. We can show you certain things that you can do and be profitable if that's the route you want to go, or just providing something for your family, your neighborhood, or even trying to some people are like, I know a young lady, a friend of mine, she had her own cafe. She started taking care of her mother, but she's thinking about getting her cafe back up and running again. And she was providing some of her products in the farmer's market.
Mhm.
And she said that she was doing really well with that. So, and I think a lot of people are going back to that. I think it's more of just us making sure that we're going to be self-sufficient.
But yes.
Yeah.
Um, that brings up dog, it was something else I was gonna ask you. Shoot. Okay. It'll come back.
That's
But
okay.
But I think it is important for us to at this juncture to really learn as much as we possibly can. So
Yes.
I was at a class last night learning how to graft tomato plants.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yep. So
Yeah.
but it was something else I wanted to ask you about the chickens. Oh,
Hmm.
I know what it is. Zoning.
Yes.
Do we need to find out from especially if we're in an urban area or suburb, the zoning, if they will allow you to have chickens or not? And
Yes. Yeah.
okay,
You'll need to do that. And like I said, that was one of the first things we were kind of discussing. Because now, where are you located?
I'm in Ohio.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
So
I'm
yeah,
in
you
Dayton,
just check
Ohio.
with them. In Dayton? Okay. I know
Hmm.
some people from Dayton.
Hmm.
But yeah, just check with them to see what the ramifications are, or if there's a certain amount of birds that you have to have and things like that. I know in the state of Tennessee, it is legal to have birds in your backyard.
Oh,
But they still do want you to kind of register with the state and so they can check and just be open to, having your birds tested. They're not saying they're going to come out and test them or it's a regular thing, but just that way they have everybody on file, especially now with, we don't necessarily, some of the backyard flocks where some of the avian flu is starting to kind of pop up. Even though right now, majority of it's happening with cattle.
okay. Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then
especially at where you are in Ohio.
yes,
I
yes,
was
yes.
looking at some of the data and they have us to sit in on these bird flu um, conferences and webinars that they've been having just to kind of for us to get the information out about how best to take care of your property or your birds and unfortunately what ended up happening was that a truck that was coming to receive the milk from the farm, there is a duck pond on on the property where the farm is. And so those tires from the truck rolled all over the duck's poop.
Oh,
And it was a one way in, one way out location. So as he's driving around the duck pond and going straight in to load up on the milk and then pull back out, then that exposes the workers because they're
mhm.
walking back and forth with their boots and things of that nature. And then of course you're gonna have to herd the animals around through that. So that was a suspected way of because they were like cows, birds, how does that work?
Yes.
But like I said, with ducks and geese and even vultures, like if vultures are eating other birds that might have died and they might have the virus, then those are ways that can be transmitted. And we don't really can't control how those birds are flying or what areas they fly over. Because I want to say we've been kind of getting reports since 2023. So usually around November, December, birds from Canada start to fly down further south,
Mm,
right? And then
hmm.
they'll come to around maybe Ohio area or Tennessee. Then they start flying a little bit further because we can get cold too. A little,
Hmm.
we don't get
Yeah.
as much snow as y'all get, but
Yeah.
we get snow and we'll get ice and we'll get really, really cold weather. But then once they get here, they'll fly even farther south. So you think about that whole mechanism, how that works. And now that it's warming back up, then that means they're going to go ahead and migrate back up north as it warms
Okay.
up a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, we're still monitoring those things. And now I think they're going to put out some money for us to apply for to start studying or, looking more into it. So I think some of the things when it comes to our livestock and our animals is a little bit lagging. Like with humans, we're always studying on us. We're
All
always
right.
saying, okay, well, we change our flu vaccine every year to try to keep up with the constant change. And you see what happened with COVID.
Hmm.
They were like, oh yeah, we've had some, SARS vaccines before, but it's not like this one. So it didn't take too long for us to go ahead and say, okay, well, we've got one we can kind of match it up with the vaccine. I mean, the RNA of this particular vaccine so that we can get it out to everybody. But unfortunately, we don't think the same way about our animals. So that's one thing we're starting to ramp up with. And maybe we'll submit a grant for that. We'll see um, when it comes to that. Or even just upgrading our practices on making sure that we're cleaning and making sure things are sanitary
I know.
because we don't monitor the farms that well because I mean majority of our farmers are really really good. They do really good work with taking care of the animals. But I mean once the product leaves the farm though, we really monitor, we really test and we do all of those things prior to them getting to the market. And then, if there's a slip up or something, then we always throw out, well, there's recalls for this, that, those, and the other. But we don't go into the farms and say, hey, just make sure that everybody's washing their hands or you're changing your boots and things of that nature. Because I mean, like I said, we grow a lot of our own food, unlike other countries. They might not be able to, regardless if they're going through a war or if they're having really severe drought seasons, or they could be having tsunamis and stuff. That really affects their ability to grow food.
Or
Luckily,
radiation. Or
yeah,
radiation.
that too.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, all of
Hmm.
those things.
Yeah.
And then all of those things actually affect their soil and their ability to grow things. Or if it's too cold, then there's certain things that you can't grow depending on where you live. Luckily, we're kind of able to grow things in different areas of the country, you know. So we can do our corn, soybeans, and cotton and stuff like that, mostly in the South. Then you know where you are, we can do a lot of cows, and cows can go off in California, you know, just things like that. So, our country, we've been able to really monopolize on it and make sure that we provide food for ourselves, but we also get a lot of money from sending food overseas.
Overseas.
Yes, and
What do
we
we
send a
have?
lot of
Yeah.
chickens. We send a lot of chicken meat overseas too.
Mm, mm,
China, they love our chicken feet.
mm.
Tyson sends it to them in thousands of pounds over bit. Well, actually more than that. We probably send out billions of tons of chicken like every month to other countries. We send poultry to Mexico. We've sent it to Brazil. And then we had a small relationship with Cuba when Obama was in office. So we were sending a couple of tons to them too. But now I don't know. We don't have that relationship anymore. However, we still sending it out to a lot of different countries. So that's how we can keep chicken prices so cheap. Is because we do send out a lot of our food to other countries. And then on top of that, we eat a lot ourselves. You'd be surprised. I don't know if I think one of the another course that I had done, we put the statistics like one person can eat like a pound of chicken, 100 pounds of chicken in a week. Yeah. Thank God most of the meat is water. So
Yeah.
it's still considered a really good lean meat. You
Well,
don't have to
I
worry
know we,
about the salt and
I
stuff.
know we're at the top of the hour and almost finished.
Mhm.
I just have one question, and I'm not
Okay.
a conspiracy theorist, but is it true that those chicken farms or poultry farms